So as much as I do really love film photography, it can really suck at times. It can just be so frustrating. And unfortunately, this is kind of one of those times. So last October we headed over to Wales for a little trip for a few days. The main reason for heading over was that we were heading to the Northern Eye Photography Festival, which is in North Wales. A lot of different speakers and photography related stuff happen at it. We seen it pop up and I seen that Kyle McDougall was one of the speakers at the event, and being a big fan of his work, I thought, why not just take a little trip over? We both wanted to head over to Wales for a while, and with this photography event being on, we thought this is kind of the perfect time to head over. We actually ended up hanging out for a while after the photography event. We actually ended up meeting and chatting with Kyle and also Alex, who you may know as Shaka on here, who's actually also a film photographer from Ireland, and also Matt, who is from the Photocopy Club, and he actually had his van sitting outside, fully kitted out to make zines on demand, which was pretty cool to see actually. We ended up just chilling, having some food, chatting about creative stuff, photography and all that good stuff. And the next day, thanks to a recommended route from Kyle, me, Christina and Alex actually went on a little road trip through the mountains with the plan to just stop when we seen some photo opportunities and take as many photos as we could really. I just had the Nikon FE with me on this trip and loaded it up with some Portra 400 for a change, which based on the results from this roll wasn't a great call, but we'll get into that. Christina was on filming duties as me and Alex just hopped in and out of the car, snapping some shots whenever we seen something that seemed photo worthy, which in Northern Wales is literally around every corner. This actually ended up being one of my favourite shots from this trip and one of the best exposure wise, as you'll see. Farmyard with an old barn and an old Land Rover and a mountain backdrop is my cup of tea, as you may well know, so yeah, love how this one turned out. Alex was shooting a mix of 120 black and white and some red scale film, and his exposures seemed to turn out pretty perfectly, so at least there was one of us. It's always nice to get a few photos of yourself doing what you love, and thanks to Alex, I have this cool photo of me taking a photo of my film camera on this red scale film that Alex was using, so yeah, it's kind of cool. Cheers for that, Alex. Going out and shooting with other photographers is not something I've really done a lot. Normally it's just me by myself or me and Christina when we're taking photos, so it was cool to just wander around with Alex, chat about photography and cameras and stuff, and also see what photos he got in the exact same area at the exact same time as I did. It really just shows that there's always different ways of taking nice photos in the same area, or maybe even of the exact same scene if you just approach it from a different angle and stuff. A different set of eyes always gets a different photo, and they could both be really nice, so yeah, I just found that kind of cool.
get it?
Hard focus to infinity. Yeah.
That's another thing.
So as you've seen from some of those photos that I just shared, there was a few exposure issues on this roll with the Nikon FE. I'm not really sure exactly why. One thing that I thought it was when I came home was, did I accidentally set it to a higher ISO film? Obviously I was shooting Portra 400. So once I got the scans back, I checked that and no, it's still sitting on the exact same sets that I had it on while shooting this roll, which is set to ISO 400 and exposure to 0. So there shouldn't have been any overexposure or underexposure set accidentally by me. I'm not sure if it's potentially the battery is getting low and that's making it sort of misread things a little bit. I can check on the Nikon FE and it does still show that the battery's okay from the little light on the back. From my experience, normally the Nikon FE actually leans towards the side of overexposing, or at least my copy does, and that would have actually worked really well for these shots because it was midday, the sun was very bright, and in a lot of these scenarios we were shooting with the sun, like shooting into the sun pretty much, backlit scenes, and overexposure would have just turned out really nice. Unfortunately in this scenario it seemed to lean towards underexposing, and in these scenarios with very bright skies and the foreground being in the shade, it ended up being quite dark in a lot of the photos, underexposed essentially. And because I was shooting Portra 400, there is quite a bit of grain. I'm used to Kodak Gold 200 where if I want to raise the shadows a little bit, I can, and I don't notice the grain as much. But with Portra, a lot more noise, probably a bit too much for my liking. Now it could just simply have been that because we were shooting in midday and the sun was so bright and we were shooting into it a lot that the camera just read that as I need to lower the exposure a little bit here. But like I said, from my experience with the Nikon FE in sort of similar scenes, it still lent towards overexposing or exposing things correctly. So yeah, not sure. To be honest though, it is putting me off using Portra 400 again on 35mm, just because when I use Kodak Gold, I know I haven't had to deal with images that are probably as underexposed as these were, but I was able to raise shadows and stuff and not notice serious heavy grain, which I did notice with the Portra 400, and yeah, it does put me off a little bit, I'll be completely honest. This shot I do really like. It is a shame that again it's a bit underexposed. I did my own scan of this negative just to see if I could bring out a bit more detail out of those shadows. I was able to a little bit I think, but at the cost of adding more grain, which doesn't really help things I don't think. I do still really like these shots even if the shadow detail isn't great. The landscape is pretty amazing. Very rugged, rural countryside with those dramatic looking mountains. It's pretty much exactly the type of scenario I want to shoot in. I really like this shot too. As we drove through the mountains, things opened up a little bit along this lake and we were surrounded by the mountains here, So being able to just frame this one up with the road winding off into the distance and the mountains just towering over everything was pretty sweet. Exposure wise, this one's actually decent too, so that's nice. After some shooting and some driving through the mountains, we stopped at this very cool little cafe to get some coffee and some snacks and stuff. And as we were coming out of the cafe, we could hear a fighter jet coming. We'd seen a few of them on the way up. I tried to get a photo, and I think Christina tried to get one, and I actually managed to. But we heard one coming, and somehow Alex managed to get this shot, which is pretty ridiculous because the speed that thing was flying past is pretty crazy. So fair play to him because he got this shot. I think it was just a hard infinity focus snap, but framed pretty nicely to be fair, so fair play Alex. And the sound of these things flying over that close is pretty crazy too. Another pullover and a little dander around this area, and I seen these really nice houses which were kind of perfectly backlit again. With the houses being backlit here, I just framed them up with the sun just off to the top corner but slightly out of frame to avoid too much lens flare, and snapped a shot. Again, the exposure in this one leaned towards being underexposed, I'd say maybe by a stop or so. It's decent, but again with Portra 400 there is quite a bit of green in those shadow areas, which is pretty much the whole subject in this photo. For this one again, I tried my own scan, and I think it does make the overall image look a little bit better, but again, bringing back more detail and brightening things up just introduced more green, which is probably too much for what I like, but looking at the image as a whole, I think I prefer my scan. It's just a lot more grainy than I would like. I think this would have been a fun one to shoot with the Yashica, framing things up and metering and stuff. It would have been tricky, but I think it would have worked pretty perfectly in square format too. Unfortunately, I didn't have the Yashica with me on this trip, but if I'm back, I'll maybe head back there with the Yashica and see what I can do. And when we got back from this trip, there was still some photos left on the roll, so me and Christina headed out to the forest for a little dander, snapped some photos, and these ended up underexposed again. Almost all of them lean towards being underexposed. In scenarios too where there wasn't really as much harsh light, it was quite even, it was more towards golden hour. But yeah, definitely a bit uncharacteristic of the Nikon, so I think I'm just going to change the battery and hope that that is the reason for these underexposed photos. I do still like some of them though. It was autumn, we still had some nice colours. It was like the tail end, but yeah, definitely leaning towards underexposed. If you remember from a video I posted a month or so ago, taking photos on a frosty morning, I took the last shot on this road during that video, and here it is. And this one actually ended up being very underexposed, and this wasn't a backlit scene or anything, so yeah, I'm beginning to think it looks kind of like a battery problem, because the last photo on the road, the battery would have been a little bit lower, and this relatively easy scene ended up being really underexposed, so I could be wrong, but I'm just going to replace the battery and hope that that's the reason. But yeah, that was our short little trip to North Wales, just a really beautiful part of the world, somewhere we've wanted to go for a while and take some photos, and definitely somewhere I would like to head back to, hopefully in the near future. There were a few not so great photos on this road, but there's also a few I quite like, and it was also just great to meet Kyle, Alex and Matt, so a pretty solid trip all round. I have been out shooting with the Yashica over the past week or so, so there should be a video coming on that quite soon. It's been fun, really slow process, but I really love using that camera. The weather's a bit on and off at the minute, so I've been trying to get out when it's nice and just slow down a little bit with the photography. Trying not to get 50 images in one video, just be really methodical with it, enjoy it, pick out the scenes I like, and yeah, it's been a little bit slower but nice, and I'm looking forward to sharing those videos too. Hopefully you enjoyed this one and some of the images in there, even if they are a little underexposed. If you did, maybe give the video a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and I think that's pretty much it for this one. So as we always say, take it easy, don't be a stranger. Oh, and just before I finish, if you don't already know those guys that I'm talking about, I'll drop the links to all their channels and socials below. You probably already do, but if not, definitely worth checking them out. Just great creative folks all around.